Hold on to your butts.
Da-da-da.
Boop.
You were saying?
Welcome to episode 73 of the Civil War Breakfast Club podcast. Tonight, I am joined by Darren Weeks, the guy who learned just how many beers you can drink at a local brewery while riding out a nor'easter. I am his Canadian co-host, and I've come to realize us Canadians don't know shit about snow.
You don't. You know a lot about intros, though. That was outstanding.
God, that was my usual train wreck.
Outstanding. So how are you? How are things up there? Speaking of snow, I saw you got a little snow yourself, I noticed.
Yeah, we did. I had a work from home day today because of the snow. So, I mean, I don't mind that. But yeah, we got a little bit of snow here. And how about you? Is all that snow melted yet from the nor'easter that went through there?
It's on its way. 3 feet of snow is going to take a few days. But it's okay. That's part of living where we do. And so be it. So we'll have a fun time. We haven't talked in a couple of weeks for this podcast. No. It feels like I knocked the rust off a little bit.
I know.
The intro, notwithstanding.
Hey, I tried. I did my best. I was determined, again, to do a good job. But as usual, it's a train wreck, right?
Another job done.
Anyways, we are back at it again after we weren't really on hiatus. We just had some stuff going on. We did a Facebook Live last night and Tuesday night, which was a lot of fun. And our Facebook Live this weekend will be on Sunday evening just because we have some stuff going on this weekend. But anyway, we are back at it.
We're still hanging out in North Carolina.
We are, yeah.
Right? Down there in Tobacco Road as we stayed down there for the third and final piece of the trilogy of what is Fort Fisher / Wilmington. As we finish up, put a bow on it, if you will, the battle, the siege, or capture, pick one, of the city of Wilmington, which takes place in February of 1865. We're going to talk about that in detail in just a few minutes. But since you're the host, I believe there's a question you need to ask me.
What are you drinking tonight?
Oh, well, I thought you'd never ask. I'm drinking, it's called Roman Candle from Bellwoods Brewery up there in Oak, Canada.
Yep, out of Toronto.
Yep, and I'm drinking out of the company mug, our Civil Breakfast Club podcast mug, as I am imbibing out of that. So, that being said, what are you drinking?
I am drinking Mega Radiant from the awesome Treehouse Brewery in, I guess I could say, no, it's not in Cape Cod. There is one in Cape Cod, but
it's Massachusetts.
It's
good,
in
close
Massachusetts.
Enough,
I just don't like saying the state name because I butcher it every single time. So
you actually did pretty well that time.
Massachusetts.
Oh, that's you got.
Well, maybe I'm finally becoming a New Englander. Who knows?
Okay.
But anyway, I'm drinking it out of my William T. Sherman and his staff, that mug, because I don't have anything related to Fort Fisher or Wilmington in mug form. So I picked Sherman's staff because at the same time as Wilmington is being attacked by the Union Army, Sherman is making his way through the Carolinas. And as Wilmington is happening, he's actually going to capture Columbia on February the 17th, 1865.
A lot of things going on in this part of the state, Mary. Yeah. So we're going to finish up the capture of Wilmington. So when we last saw Wilmington late January 1865, Mary, the Second Battle of Fort Fisher had just been won by the combined forces of Alfred Terry's Provisional Force as well as David Porter's Navy. It shut off the Confederacy's last seaport. It stopped those blockade runners who had all that success getting into the city. And in essence, what it really did is it put a nail in the Confederacy's coffin, right? And we've said before, Robert E. Lee had spoke of the importance of Wilmington. You probably don't remember, but he said as early as January of 1863 that we must defend Wilmington at all hazards. And then not long after that, he said, if Wilmington falls, I cannot maintain my army. He was very prophetic in a lot of ways. And we're going to find out what's going to happen to poor old Wilmington as we talk about this battle.
We are. And believe it or not, I do remember some stuff. Anyway, so the fall of Fort Fisher means that the fall of Wilmington is inevitable. So a little bit about Wilmington. It is the largest city in North Carolina, a major Atlantic seaport for the Confederates. It's 30 miles upstream from the mouth of the Cape Fear River, which is where Fort Fisher was located. And it's one of the Confederates' most important cities, as you highlighted earlier, because of the supplies that are coming in from these blockade runners. In 1860, Wilmington is about the size of Atlanta, Georgia, population of about 9,500. The supplies that were brought in here included munitions, clothing, food, and they would be transferred to railway cars and then sent throughout the South. Many left on the Wilmington and Weldon Railway. Many of these supplies are going to Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. And that's why Lee sees Wilmington and Fort Fisher as being so important because, as you know, at this time, the March to the Sea has happened and Sherman is going through the Carolinas. So those supplies coming from that area are very, very scarce because Sherman has ripped up the infrastructure like the railways. So Lee's got one line. It's from Wilmington from these blockade runners. The blockade runners are coming from Bermuda, the Bahamas. A few are coming from Nova Scotia, but it's mainly supplies from the British.
Don't forget Kokomo.
Kokomo, yeah.
Get there fast and they're going to take it slow.
Did you like that I didn't sing that line?
Thank you.
You're welcome. It doesn't mean I'm not going to sing sometime in this episode. These blockade runners are forced to fly the Confederate insignia because Lincoln had ordered any British pirates be put to death. And that's basically what these British guys are considered as pirates. And the crews of these blockade runners were a boost to the local economy of Wilmington as well. And because of that, Wilmington becomes the typical seaport town. So these guys are going to go to bars, hotels, and the bang barns as well. No, not these sailors, right? Other thing, too, that happens is summer of 1862, there's an outbreak of yellow fever that's brought in from these sailors coming into town. And around 1,000 people are infected and 300 people die during this outbreak. So when Norfolk, Virginia falls, Wilmington becomes even more important because then it means it's this last holdout on the coast for the Confederates. And for the most part, these blockade runners have, what was it, like an 80% success rate?
It was 80% getting through, and Fort Fisher would light up their fort lights so they can see where it was. Because don't forget, Fort Fisher was an earthen fort. It was small. It was tough to see from the ocean. So you have to put lights on, light their torches so these blockaders could see and they can get through. And after Mobile fell, it was the only game in town. You mentioned the town. It went from a little podunk town to Vegas overnight. And it's no surprise they had the issues at these big, every weekend is Fleet Week. Think about it.
Basically,
that's what it
yeah.
was.
So, and it was obviously a huge boost to the local economy. So, if Wilmington gets captured by the Union, then they're not going to be bringing in that money from these British sailors / pirates, whatever you want to call them.
They're going to have bigger problems than that.
Yes.
I mean, they have 99 problems. That ain't one of them. Okay. They're going to have a lot of problems if Wilmington falls. We're going to talk about that, is what that's going to do. Because what it's going to do is it's going to close those walls in on that Confederate army, both of Robert E. Lee and Joseph Johnston, where they literally have to live off the land where there isn't much to eat anymore. The whole area has been barren. And when you take out those supplies, that's going to end it. And when we talk about this, we'll see what the Union does to actually do it.
And it's like the blockade running at Wilmington is known as the lifeline of the Confederacy. There was a couple of ironclads that had blocked the approaches to Wilmington. There was a North Carolina near Smithville, which was on the Western Bar Inlet. It didn't do much because it had a really weak engine. But the story is that it went to Wilmington to dispute the ownership of cargo on a blockade runner one time named the and its bottom ended up sustaining slow damage from the saltwater marine worms that were there, and it sank on September 27th, 1864, having never seen any action. So this is one of the things that was supposed to help kind of protect these blockade runners coming in. The other was the Raleigh, which saw some action on May the 6th, 1864, when it was attacked by a blockading fleet off New Inlet. 6 blockade runners managed to escape, but it ends up running aground on a sandbar in the Cape Fear River. During the war, the Federals managed to wreck, capture, or destroy 130 vessels. That might seem like a lot, but it really wasn't in the grand scheme of things when you think about 80% make it through. Regarding that 80%, the Confederate War Department said about 1 in every 4 steamers is captured by the enemy. We can afford that. All they really lost was 1 million cubic feet of cargo. And again, that seems like a lot, but when you think about the 80% that got through, that's quite a bit. And it was actually Rear Admiral S.P. Lee, a Union guy who is related to Robert E. Lee. He was the one that tried to keep the ships from getting in, but obviously he doesn't have a lot of success. But his thing was he had these small light draft vessels that would lay close to the inlet, and they would signal when an impending escape of a runner was going by, and they did this by sending a rocket up in the air. The blockade runners eventually get really, really smart, and they have their own rockets just to create all this confusion, right? And these small ships are not going to pursue. When the rockets were spotted, the mid-range force would react to these signals and attempt to capture or sink the runner. And then the outer force patrol would kind of watch for incoming blockade runners and attempt to capture any runners that may slip by. But again, they don't have a high success rate in doing this. So the Union only is going to capture like 130 vessels in the time of the Civil War.
Oh, and the big part of that success rate is Fort Fisher. Now, when we talked about that, there was a couple of attempts at Fort Fisher. The first one failed. The second one did succeed. It fell on January 15th, 1865. Confederate general in North Carolina area clown Braxton Bragg. He decided not to send reinforcements to Fort Fisher's commander, a guy named William H.C. Whiting, as well as Charles Lamb, because it was for fear that by doing so, he was going to risk Wilmington. And we talked about that and the safety of that town and that safety of the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad that you mentioned for Robert E. Lee's supply line. Bragg certainly has no intention of trying to retake Fort Fisher. It's clear, despite Jefferson Davis's request to do so. Locals in Wilmington, for the most part, also fear that he's going to withdraw from the town altogether. He's just going to go, and he orders a complete media blackout of all Civil War things. No one could talk about it, apparently. As backwards thinking as that was, that not sending troops to protect Fort Fisher because it was going to hurt Wilmington, what that really did is it dealt Wilmington a mortal blow. Because when Fort Fisher fell, Wilmington was gone. It was dead.
Yeah.
Bragg maintained a defense outside of the city, hoping that he could still keep the city from the Federals, which really didn't make any sense. What Bragg does do is he takes some troops, he moves them to a place called Sugarloaf, about 6 miles north of Fort Fisher, on the east side of the Cape Fear River, and put about 6,600 men under the control of a North Carolinian Major Robert Hoke, right, who was actually sent down from Robert E. Lee from Virginia to help defend Wilmington, to defend the west side of the river. So picture a river that's going north and south, and there's a peninsula on each side of it, and that's the defenses that they're going to defend. So Bragg is going to evacuate the rebel garrisons of places like Fort Holmes and Fort Caswell and Smithfield and places like that. He'll leave behind some guns and ammo, which he wishes he probably had later, by the way.
Yeah.
And he's going to concentrate their forces at a place called Fort Anderson. Now, this is directly across the river from Sugarloaf, and put Fort Anderson under the command of a South Carolinian named Johnson Haygood. Now, Johnson Haygood was also fighting with Lee up in Petersburg, and he was sent down. He lost 60%, 6-0 of his brigade in Petersburg before he came here. So he was coming down bleeding from the Savannah when he made it here, okay?
Oh.
Now, Bragg, he hoped he would place men there and on the west side of the river at Fort Anderson, because he was thinking what he could do is he could stop or at least slow the Union advance from going up the river and capturing Wilmington. That was his big plan, which is at least slow them down, speed bump them. The Confederacy would roll in with about 7,500 men heading into February. By the time the battle started, they had already lost 1,000 because many deserted by just walking into the swamps and never coming back. What the hell those went, but they just
Clowns.
They just took them. See, I don't want to say it, but despite being completely outnumbered and basically screwed because of the loss of Fort Fisher, the locals in Wilmington did remain confident. The Wilmington Daily Journal, they wrote, "The cause is not gone up. This is the time to try our manhood." That's what the newspaper said. Okay, sure, sounds good. On the Union side, Washington decided to change things up a little bit again for the second phase of the Second Battle of Fort Fisher. First phase was take the fort. Second phase was take Wilmington, and they were going to put in charge of this phase our old friend from Franklin, Mary, John Schofield of the 23rd Corps, and he's going to command that 21,000 man Wilmington Expeditionary Force, who arrived in the area from Alexandria, Virginia in early 1865. So again, some of the players are changing, some of them are staying the same. Now, we did talk a lot about Schofield in that Franklin episode, so I'm not going to kind of go through him all over again. He was a New Yorker who ultimately would replace Edwin Stanton as Secretary of War down the road, whatever, after Andrew Johnson fired him. He'd be in charge of those Union forces, charged with taking Wilmington. That was the deal what he was going to be. Now, we'll talk in detail how it worked, but in a nutshell, what his plan was going to be was he wanted to do what was a three-pronged attack, right? He was going to attack, and this would be, again, a joint force with Porter's Navy. On the west side of the peninsula, he would be led in a force by the 3rd Division commanding general named a Montreal native, Mary, Jacob Cox. How about that? Here we go, right? Of Schofield's 23rd Corps. Cox was born up in what would become Canada. It wasn't Canada yet.
I still call it Canada.
He probably spent a lot of time with the Kincardine DQ. But the thing about him, though, he spent most of his time in Ohio, where he became the state's governor of 1866. He also became president of the University of Cincinnati, Mary. He also became dean of a law school, and he was also a microbiologist. This guy had the single best LinkedIn account in the Civil War. No question. I mean, this guy did it all. Now, on the east side of the river, we have Alfred Terry. He's back, right? He's got his 6,000 men. What he would do is drive north and attack Robert Hoke's defensive line, who was sitting at that Sugarloaf we talked about, and try to drive them back. Really, what they're going to do is they're going to push, force them back into the town. And then what would happen is Porter's 30 gunboats would sail up the river, blast away at the defenses, and they'd all meet at the quarterback in Wilmington. Yeah. That's kind of, in a nutshell, that's what they were going to do. Gunboats were going to hammer those defenses. They were going to eventually do it until they could take control of Wilmington. So February 11th, 1865, the attack is going to begin as Terry's men moving up to attack Hoke's Sugarloaf line. This attack again is going to begin with the bombardment from Porter's guns that were actually anchored on the ocean side. It's firing right over. And then about an hour or so later, Terry's men are going to move in.
By late afternoon, Schofield and Terry, they managed to overrun the Confederates, but they think that there's more the Confederate works might be too strong. So what we saw with previous battles, with Fort Fisher, we're seeing again with this to take Wilmington, that they're like, we don't know if we want to go in. There might be too many. They think that it's too strong to be captured by a frontal assault. So Schofield makes the decision to capture Wilmington from the west side of the river.
Right, but before we jump over to the west, let's finish the east,
Yep.
okay? Who are the players in the east? Because it's interesting who they had. So Terry's going to have Charles Payne's division, which is made up of 9 regiments of the USCT, the United States Colored Troops, under the command of a guy named John Ames and a guy named Elias Wright.
Yep.
They're going to be moving towards Hoke's Line, right? So by late in the afternoon, the 11th, they've been going about 3 hours now, to your point, trying to test those lines. Payne's USCT troops are going to hit that staunch rebel line, but they couldn't drive it back. The Rebs, you're right, Terry and Schofield both said, maybe this isn't a good idea, because the line was stronger, admittedly, than, like you said, than they thought. Now, Payne's guys took 92 casualties, but they couldn't break the line. Now, many of these white officers, okay, this is the first time they saw black men fight. Jacob Cox, he wrote, they were well disciplined and well led and went forward with alacrity. No one uses that word anymore, alacrity.
Nope.
Use that from now on. Capital form, showing that they were good soldiers. So what do you have? You have a situation with these U.S. colored troops, and we're going to talk about them. Many were from North Carolina. Were fighting. Their officers are being quite impressed by them. One of them actually captured a rebel soldier, an officer. This black USCT guy caught a rebel officer and took him to the rear and said, "He's my prisoner. Old Massa is." Turns out the officer was a soldier's former slave master.
Oh my God.
So that must have been a hell of a reunion behind the Union line, right? But that's what you had. You had these USCT guys from North Carolina. This guy caught his slave master. Can you imagine what that must have been like? Seriously?
Oh my God. That's the ultimate right there.
While this is going on, which is pretty cool, we mentioned the blockade runners a second ago, right? The blockade runners didn't know the fort had fallen. You forgot how would they, right?
Yeah, they wouldn't know.
The internet was probably taken down. The first thing they took was the Wi-Fi down. They couldn't reach, right? But either that or they didn't care. They kept trying to deliver goods, right? Now, Admiral Porter thought it would be a good idea to keep those signal lights I mentioned on the fort lit to attract them. And then he would assign Lieutenant William Cushing, we're going to talk about him in a little while, to trap these blockade boats, right? In just a couple of days, they caught 3 ships, including the British steamer Charlotte, coming from Bermuda. This was the boat that Benjamin Gates found the national treasure.
Yes.
It wasn't. It sounds good,
I was just going to say, I thought maybe it was. I heard Charlotte, I'm like, national treasure.
Well, it had a secret with it, apparently. It was not the same boat, but there was a boat called Charlotte, so I had to bring that up.
You got me all excited.
Right. I know. So, but to your point, Schofield decides, maybe our best route here. This Hoke line's gonna be too strong. Maybe we should try that Fort Anderson Road and see if that works too.
Yeah. So they are going to try at Fort Anderson. The Union General Jacob Cox's 3rd Division of the 23rd Corps that's going to be ferried to the west bank of the Cape Fear River, and Fort Anderson is the main fort guarding Wilmington, as Darren mentioned earlier. So Porter has. Pardon? Did you just say who?
Who?
Fucker.
I said Darren mentioned earlier. It's just you and I,
I know. Darren.
Okay. Well, if you see Mary, tell her to feel free to continue.
Oh my God. Anyway, Porter has some of his gunboats shell the fort, which silenced all 12 of its guns. And this is where we have Lieutenant Commander William B. Cushing come in here. He's really interesting. So I have some backstory about him, which is pretty cool. So he's the brother of Alonzo Cushing, who is killed horribly at Gettysburg. Gets a Medal of Honor. Anyway, his brother William is going to serve in the Navy. He is best known for the sinking of the USS Albemarle during a night raid on October the 27th, 1864. And that's a really cool story, which I've got a little bit about it. William is born in Delafield, Wisconsin in 1842, and he ends up moving to Fredonia, New York. He goes to the U.S. Naval Academy, but he ends up getting expelled right before graduation for pranks and just not doing great in his classes. But he gets reinstated when he pleads his case to Gideon Welles, the Union Secretary of the Navy under Abraham Lincoln. And it's a good thing Welles does this, because Cushing is going to go on to acquire a very distinguished record in the Civil War. He frequently volunteers for dangerous missions, and he's often the one doing the plans for them. And that's where you have this mission against the CSS Albemarle, which was an ironclad. And this was Cushing's daring plan. The problem with the Albemarle was it dominated the Roanoke River during the summer of 1864. So Cushing had 2 small steam engines, which he finds in New York City being built. He wants to fit them with spar torpedoes. So at the very ends of them, they're torpedoes that, basically you have a lanyard and they explode. So he gets these 2 from New York, and he mounts each of them with a 12-pound Dahlgren howitzer and a 14-foot spear projecting from the bow. One of them gets lost at sea, unfortunately, but the other arrives safely. So they launch this spar and they fit it with a lanyard detonated torpedo. October 27th, 28th, 1864, this is going to be a night mission. They go upriver and they get past the Confederate sentries that are on a schooner, but then they end up getting spotted and they come under heavy fire from the Albemarle as well as by just some troops that are on the land as well. The Albemarle is defended by these floating log booms, but they turn out to be covered in slime, so their boat just slides right over it really easily. So they get the spar fully against the side of the Albemarle's hull, and Cushing stands up in the bow and detonates it. He does the detonation himself, which is pretty cool. And the explosion just throws everybody off the boat. So Cushing swims to the shore, takes off his uniform, hides out till morning, and then in the afternoon, he steals a small boat, goes downriver, sneaks past the Confederates again to rejoin the Union forces. And the Albemarle is going to sink in 6 feet of water, which is below her keel, but the upper armored casement is going to remain mostly dry, and the Union ends up managing to, I think, get the flag off. And post-Civil War, Cushing is going to be an ordnance officer at Boston Navy Yard, but he had a lot of health problems, and he ends up passing away on December 17th, 1874. And he's buried at Bluff Point, which is the U.S. Naval Academy Cemetery. And the Cushing is the only family to have children buried at both military academies, so both West Point as well as Annapolis. So that's a pretty cool story.
It is one of those things, Yeah, no question. He's obviously played a big part in this here in a little bit. Yep. So February 16th, Jacob Cox's 6,500 men, like I said, are going to be ferried across. They're going to land on that western peninsula, and they're going to start marching towards the fort. And there's that story where they're marching when all those slaves come running out, celebrating, singing songs, watching these guys chucking like in the scene Glory.
Yeah.
Watching the men march. Cox is going to try to attack the fort's face, and he's going to have Adelbert Ames, the 2nd Division of the 24th Corps, and he's going to try to get around the fort's flank and try to attack that way. He's going to try to surround it in a nutshell, right? Now, Cox is going to march up that west bank, and he's going to send 2 brigades, one under Orlando Moore from the 2nd Division, and the other under Thomas Henderson, who commanded the 3rd Brigade under Cox's 3rd Division. And they're going to march towards Fort Anderson. While they're marching, there's going to be a brass band playing from the 104th Ohio, playing all these patriotic songs while they're marching. Mm-hmm. Okay, it sounds good.
Yeah.
Now, this is funny. In defiance, the Rebs, someone had a good sense of humor. Musicians in the fort from the 25th South Carolina respond with songs of their own, kind of like a dueling band.
That's right? Amazing.
Right? They're going to play a song, though. It's called Who's Been Here Since I've Been Gone? You know what that song's about? It's about a song about a soldier who returned home to find out his wife was hooking up with his brother. That's the song.
Oh my God.
So I don't know who the hell put that coin in the jukebox to play that song, but that's what they were playing with to shout out the Union band. Yeah. They were playing that. I thought it was fun. Federal troops under Ames are going to go through the swamp, and they're going to try to get around that rebel flank, like I said, and they're going to use Brigadier General John Casement's brigade as well as a guy named Oscar Sterl from Cox's division. They're the ones who, they're the lucky guys who get to muck, go through the muck and the crap to try to get through around the side of the fort. Now, fortunately for these troops, like you mentioned a little while ago, Porter's guns had taken out all 12 of their guns. So they had kind of an easy walk into the fort.
And they managed to do that because of Cushing and his fake monitor that he constructed, which tricks the Confederates into detonating their mines that they have in the water. So Porter's able to get his gunboats through and able to be able to do this.
So this fort is a sitting duck. Cox and Ames are right there. They're ready to take it. The thing about this attack, though, is in this whole battle, whenever the Union troops are ready to fight, the rebels are going to abandon their position. They're going to fall back towards Wilmington. Yep. And that's what happened here at Fort Anderson. It's kind of like a 19th century whack-a-mole game, where you just you can't get them
Yeah.
because they keep falling back. Now, Haygood, we mentioned, he knew those 12 guns were gone. He got word from the Union troops who were all around him at this point, planning on surrounding the whole fort. In the cover of darkness on February 18th, he pulls out his F this card and he's going to decide to abandon the fort. He'll fall back to a new defensive line at a place called Town Creek. Now, before leaving, he's going to kind of lay out his dead at a place called St. Philip's Church, just kind of lay him there for some reason. Soon later, troops under Henderson, that brigade, are going to happily go into the fort and take the fort, pretty much untouched. Very easy attack. Now, Cox was still hoping to bag Haygood, right? It must have been so frustrating for Cox because he was so close and Cox kept falling back. Now, while this is going on the west side, over on the east side, Robert Hoke's men have also fallen back to a new line. They're about 3 miles now south of Wilmington. Now, like Cox, Alfred Terry had no choice but to pursue Hoke as well, because they're going up to Wilmington.
Yep.
And instead of fighting and just ending them, they keep falling back. So
he's following them very cautiously because he doesn't know what to expect. And I think this is something like, this seems to be like a pattern with Terry, is he seems like, he'll get really close to something and be like, I don't know. He seems to be very overly cautious.
He definitely smelled a rat. When they kept falling back, he definitely thought that there was a possibility they were going to be ambushed because it just seemed too easy.
Well, it turns out that Hoke does outnumber him at one point, but once they get Ames's men ferried back across, then Terry's okay.
The Rebs, they're going to release those 200 torpedoes into the water, right? And not just that, the Quaker boat they did. This is a big issue because there was a lot of them. Porter decided that what he had to do was put guys on rowboats with big nets to go and get them. Yeah. How's that for a fun job, right? To go before the torpedoes floated down the river and hit them. So this was ordered by Cushing too. So he had to deal with that. And he, for the most part, took care of it. So the boats kind of had a clear path too. Now, back to that west side again, the Town Creek line. Because this is kind of going on at the same time. So you kind of have to do it simultaneously. Yep. Haygood burned the only bridge that crossed Town Creek to slow Cox's advance north. And he set up a line just on the northern side across the river there. Now, Cox, he has no bridge and he has to get across, and he's trying to find a way to ford this creek, and he can't do it. It's just shitty ground. It's swampy. The terrain was just too hard to find. And this is when you get lucky, right?
Yeah.
You need to right? For whatever reason, Haygood didn't notice a small cotton barge on Cox's side of Town Creek, and the Federals heard about it because of a local slave who goes, hey, you can't cross. I just happen to lose a boat over here if you want to take this boat, right? It only took 75 guys at a time. But eventually, Cox got all 3 brigades across this creek, and he left the 4th one to kind of cover them. So he got all of his guys across this creek now. Now, once Cox got there were 3,000 guys. Once he got 3,000 men across, they charged with bayonets across his open fields, and the firefight was so brutal that it caught all the grass on fire. That's what some of the soldiers said. It was quite a thing. Haygood, for this part, knew he was basically foobar at this point. Yep. He just did. He's going to fall back yet again. This time he's going to go all the way back to Wilmington. He'll leave 2 regiments, 370 guys to kind of cover the retreat. They're all going to be caught.
They're
prisoners.
All captured. That Union gets 2 artillery as well from that.
Right. Haygood he's evacuated the dance floor, as you like to say now. And what first thing Cox does is he rebuilds those bridges, and he's not only going to have that artillery, he's going to get some more from Schofield to bring across. So now, as they all approach Wilmington, they arrive just almost the same time as Porter's gunboats got within firing range of the city now, right? So there are going to be some Rebs that are going to be at a place called Eagle Island. It's a small island that separates Cape Fear and the Brunswick Rivers near Wilmington. As the Union troops approached, they started firing artillery at the Union guys. And what happened was the Union guys responded to these Ohio guys with these rifle guns, right? And they returned fire. Some of the shots started to fall into the city. And Haygood's like, whoa. You know what? They're going to blow the whole friggin' city up here. Stop shooting. So the Rebs stopped shooting. That was kind of the west side. Now, on the eastern side again, Terry's men continued to press on Hoke's men as they inched forward slowly towards Wilmington from the other side of the river. Now, February 20th, Alfred Terry is going to meet with General Charles Payne. Now, he's that Harvard guy we talked about from Boston, commanded the 3rd Division of the 25th Corps. He's going to command 3 brigades of those USCTs we talked about. And these are the guys who fought at Battle of the Second Fort Fisher. So they're battle-tested guys. Terry and Payne decide to use these soldiers yet again to try to overrun Hoke's line. And like I said before, many of these guys are from North Carolina, so they kind of were fighting for their homes as well. Hoke had fallen back to a junction of a place called Federal Point Road and a small lane called Forks Road. This defensive line that's set up along this Forks Road would be really Hoke's kind of last stand. His men had set up these really strong breastworks made of pine trees and sand. They've been set up before by slaves to defend Wilmington before. But it's a hell of a defensive line. Terry's guys pursued, and there was that cool story that was reported in the Philadelphia Inquirer around this time. There was a Union corporal named Jacob Horn, and he's in the Union. He asked permission to stop at his parents' house that was on the way up the peninsula. It was granted, and it was said in the paper that the soldier was soon clasped in the arms of his overjoyed mother. So he saw his mother, okay? Now, what's cool about it is the mother tells Jacob, your brother Hosea was here yesterday. Hosea Horn was a member of the Confederate Wilmington Horse Artillery.
Oh, wow.
And he stopped there with the Confederates pulling away from home just the day before. So just imagine that for a second. You're a mother and you have a son on each side stopping at your house on consecutive days about to fight each other, right? So Hoke had one brigade of infantry, guys from the 8th, the 31st, the 51st, and the 61st North Carolina. He had him under a guy named Thomas Lanier Clingman. 1832, University of North Carolina graduate, also a U.S. Senator in 1858, who got the old heave-ho for supporting the Confederacy. They got rid of that. Hoke had that brigade. He also had that horse artillery I just mentioned with Horn. Terry's going to advance with 5,500 men under the men from Ames' 2nd Division and Payne's 3rd Division of 3,300 U.S. colored troops from the 24th Corps, and they're going to march directly into Hoke's line. When they hit this line, the Federals are going to take high casualties, and they attacked Hoke's entrenched line, and they really advanced on really sloppy ground. So you got that small little Forks Road and surrounded on both sides by swamp. So a lot of these guys are marching through the muck and the crap to get there. The lead brigade was under a guy named Colonel Elias Wright's 1st USCT Brigade of about 2,000 guys, and primarily the 5th USCT Regiment, who did most of this fighting on this Forks Road. These guys are going to fight for 34 hours, okay, against a well-entrenched rebel line, and poor Mrs. Horn could hear the battle from her house. That's how close they were, right? So imagine what's going through her mind, right? On the second day, which is the 21st of February, this battle's going to continue, and the Feds are going to be kind of looking for a weak spot in the line because it's so entrenched so well, it's just hard to beat. Mm-hmm. It was around this time they started to see that black smoke starting to appear from the direction of Wilmington, right?
Yep.
And so they're thinking, well, maybe they're getting ready to go. This fight along this Forks Road, it would continue into the next day, too, on the 22nd. That was the plan. But when the sun rose on February 22nd, the Rebs, gone. They disappear, which they want to do. They had fallen back to Wilmington, as did Haygood's men on the other side of the river. Much to the delight of these USCT troops, because that meant that Schofield now and them, too, were going to get to slide right into Wilmington. Now, what makes this battle cool, and I don't know how much you know about this Battle of Forks Road, Mary, was besides the fact that USCT guys fought in it, the local USCT North Carolinians fought for it. It's a battlefield that was not discovered until the 1980s.
I think I knew that about it. I remember.
And it's so a couple of historians by the name of Robert Treadwell and Charles Fonville, they discovered relics of this battle, and they figured out what the hell happened to it. They got to name it. How cool that is.
That's right? So cool.
So they call it the Battle of Forks Road. And you can go visit the site today. It's still there. You can still see the breastworks. The Confederates at this point were kind of screwed.
Yeah, Bragg pulls out his F this card around the 21st, and he's like, we're going to have to abandon the city, right? And so he evacuates Union prisoners that are there and anything of military value. But cotton, tobacco is burned, there's buildings burned, he probably burned all the bang barns, like all that stuff is going to be burned. And it kind of gives you think back to on February the 17th, well, all this shit is happening. Columbia has been captured. And, there's a lot of burning that happens in Columbia. And yes, some of it is Union troops that cause it, but who it probably was that started it was Wade Hampton's cavalry. because
Yeah, I mean,
that's what they have to do, right? Like, you're not going to leave the enemy ship behind. So I think that kind of gives a little bit more towards that Sherman didn't walk in and torch that city, because look at what Bragg is doing here at Wilmington. And the Union troops can see the black smoke, and that's the cotton and the tobacco burning, so they don't fall into Union hands. He's burning, the munitions where they're storing them. Like, he's burning all these buildings that would be of use to the Union.
well, it's interesting, but Bragg, it wasn't really Bragg's idea to do that, though.
No.
Bragg is going to write to Robert E. Lee. He's going to
Yeah.
see Hoke and Haygood. Hey, where'd you guys come from? Right there. He's got no one else. He's got the boat, so he's going to give the evacuation order. And that's obviously where all of Haygood's guys disappeared to on the 22nd when the USCT guys went to all came back. Bragg's going to write to Robert E. Lee. He's going to say the enemy is in force on the west and on our communication lines are cut. We are greatly outnumbered. Lee's going to respond, destroy all cotton, tobacco, DQs, and naval stores that would otherwise fall in the hands of the enemy. So it was Lee who told him to torch it, which is interesting because that was the supplies, right?
What are the Union soldiers going to do with their DQ gift cards?
They're probably still there. Another battlefield waiting to be discovered. We can go find them.
Well, they don't expire, so they can come to King Cardine then.
Okay, you got it. So Bragg is going to write back, and he's going to say, our small force rendered it impossible to make any serious stand. We are greatly embarrassed by prisoners, the enemy refusing to receive them or entertain any proposition of exchange. So the feds, we saw this with Gettysburg, right?
Yeah.
The feds would not exchange them, knowing it would slow their roll out of town. Now, Bragg had no choice but to burn the warehouses and supplies and use his cavalry, Hampton, to destroy all the bridges in town as well as his supplies. Bragg, it's interesting, is going to write after the evacuation. He's going to write, by the active and efficient operation of the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad, we succeeded in getting all of the prisoners able to travel in all important stores. Some naval stores had a small lot of cotton and tobacco, were destroyed by fire. Here's my favorite line. They could have been saved for not the occupation in the trains by prisoners. So what he's saying is, if I could have saved all the supplies, but I had to take the prisoners, well, not my fault. He's pulling the Shaggy card again, right?
Wow.
He's saying, I would have given you a ride home, but I just don't have room in the car. That's kind of what he says.
That's so shitty.
So that's why he says, I mean, I don't know how big that train must have been, okay, but he's going to say that, right? Bragg he's going to retreat to avoid the Federals. He's going to head north, hoping to connect with Lee and support him in Virginia. We talked about that before. Yep. But it's funny because Jacob Cox, now from Montreal, he's going to learn the city is abandoned by the rebels by citizens of Wilmington.
Yep.
And Jacob Cox is going to write, Bragg had carefully removed all boats from the outer side of the channel, but citizens anxious to prevent us from firing on the town came over in skiffs. And we learned the Confederate forces had marched towards Goldsboro, leaving the way open for Terry's march into the city, which took place in the early morning of the 22nd, which we were happy to recall was George Washington's birthday, which is pretty cool, right?
That is cool.
Athena goes on with this. So Terry's men, both black and white soldiers, are going to march into Wilmington. Patriotic music is blasting and playing. You can just imagine.
Yeah.
David Porter, he's going to write to Gideon Wells. He's going to write, I have the honor to inform you that Wilmington has been evacuated and is in possession of our troops. I had the pleasure of placing the flag on Fort Strong, there's another close defensive point, at noon today. We shall fire a 35-gun salute, that being the anniversary of Washington's birthday. So this Washington's birthday is not being missed by anybody. It's a big deal. We saw with July 4th, Vicksburg and Gettysburg, and another national big moment, right? Terry will take the official surrender of the town by a guy named John Dawson, who's the mayor. Now, this is a cool story, too. Terry is going to set up his headquarters and raise the old Stars and Stripes Mary at the home of a Dr. John Bellamy, right, who owned the best mansion in town. Big place, right? And this Bellamy was a hardcore secessionist. He hosted a torchlight party to celebrate secession when North Carolina seceded. So Bellamy, he finds out that there are a bunch of Union guys in his house. And he's like, fuck, no way. He left the town to avoid the war. He left. He just got the hell out of Dodge. That's why the house is vacant, okay? Bellamy is going to apply to General Terry's chief of staff, a guy named Brigadier General Joseph Hawley, for permission to return to his house. Hawley was a radical Republican from North Carolina. He denied Bellamy's request. And he responded, he says, having for 4 years been making your bed, you must lie in it for a while. That's what he wrote to Bellamy. Ooh. So he's like, go screw, right?
Wow.
Now, as much as Bellamy and the rest of the South were pissed, the North was completely galvanized by this. Not just cutting Lee's supply line, it was a gigantic shot in the arm of the North, who saw this war now as basically won and all within sight. Even the New York Times, February 25th in 1865, what they wrote in this article was, had anyone at the time of the presidential election in November last predicted the military achievements of the last 3 months of winter, he would have been looked upon as a lunatic. But this bold catalog gives us a faint idea of the greatness and triumphs of the armies of the Union and the staggering blows inflicted on the rebellious South. This morning was Wilmington, which was proudly recorded as being under our flag on Wednesday last, Washington's birthday. Our president, our troops entered and took possession of this long-sought prize. So we look at it from a military standpoint a lot, right?
Yep.
Where capturing Wilmington was a big military boon. It gave Schofield and Sherman that supply base on the water. It denied Lee. But what this really did, this was a high five in the street moment in the North, because they realized now this is the quarterback getting ready to take a knee with a minute to go in the clock run. They knew it was over.
Yeah, they did. And, their next thing that they're going to do, Grant had written to Sherman on January the 21st, 1865. So this is, a month and a day before Wilmington falls into Union hands. And he says, if Wilmington is captured, Schofield will go there. If not, he will be sent to New Bern. In either event, all surplus forces at the 2 points will move to the interior towards Goldsboro in cooperation with your movements. This capturing of Wilmington is in cooperation with what Sherman is doing in the Carolinas right now. Their next objective is going to be Goldsboro. And Braxton Bragg has gone to Goldsboro. But in March of 1865, at a little less than a month after Wilmington has fallen into Union hands, Goldsboro is going to be seized by the Union, and it is a major railway hub. So they are slowly, well, I shouldn't say slowly, they are quickly getting what they want, right? Wilmington was a huge get for them. Huge, from kind of like a moral standpoint, military standpoint. But Grant's ultimate goal was actually Goldsboro. And they got it. And that was going to be Sherman's supply base as well. And then also at the end of this, some members of the Confederacy call for the resignation of Jeff Davis because they couldn't believe that he allowed for this to happen.
Yeah, well, he was telling them to keep the fort, keep doing it. He tried. I mean, it really, you look at how this whole thing was lost when Bragg gave up Fort Fisher and let him have it, because he really did. He just didn't. I
don't know if he just didn't. It just didn't click with him. Like, well, I got to protect Wilmington. Like, no, dude, you actually have to protect the fort.
Yeah, I think he was afraid of spreading his troops too thin. He still had to worry about an overland attack from the north. You can see he tried. He did get troops. He had Haygood, obviously, who came down. He had a whole bunch of troops from Lee's army of Northern Virginia. They were banged up when they got there, but he had something. But as far as the Wilmington siege goes, the casualties were actually pretty low, just about 300 for the Union, about 800 for the Confederates. But like I said before, the fall of Wilmington was the nail in the coffin for the Confederacy. Lee, he was going to be running away from Richmond looking for supplies.
He's not going to get them. The Wilmington was the major supplier for the Army of Northern Virginia. So it's no coincidence that on April the 9th, Lee surrenders to General Grant at Appomattox.
And it's not too hard to trace back why it happened. I mean, the Fort Fisher battles, the capturing Fort Fisher in the second battle was the domino that got to Wilmington, and that was a domino that really bled Lee out that end of the war. Just a mock-up. No, so if you're looking for to play the Kevin Bacon game.
Yep.
It's easy to realize that Appomattox happens because of Wilmington, which happened because of Fort Fisher. And was because of the efforts of people like David Porter, for example, who continually wanted to fight this attack and want to take Fort Fisher. He finally got his wish. You had some of the mistakes of the Christmas Day one with Butler, but again, you bring the right guys in, you bring
like Terry and Schofield.
So you do the right things to take the battle and finally take it. So if you're looking for a real cause of this war ending when it did, this war probably would have gone into the summertime if Fort Fisher didn't fall. There's no question it would have. Now, the rebels weren't going to win. It was never a question of the winning was a question of when. The longer they kept that war going, especially if they fell into a guerrilla war like some guys like EPL, because they had wanted to do, they would at least had supplies, and there's a lot of things they could have had. But this really was locking the fridge on them, and it was a matter of time till they had to surrender. That's exactly what happened. So I think a lot more study needs to be done into Fort Fisher and Wilmington, because I don't think it's studied enough. I think it's certainly worthy of 3 episodes of the threesome we pulled off here with these 3.
Ooh.
And I think And I think it'll be a lot of fun to talk about going forward. So what's next for us, Mary?
Next is Mill Springs. We're going to be talking that. And then after that, we got to sit down and do some planning to figure out what else we're going to be doing. We will be doing our roundtable in February, which I believe it is going to be on February the 16th.
Oh,
Wednesday,
okay. 2
February.
days after Hancock's birthday. Mary.
Yes, it is. Yes, because his birthday is Valentine's Day.
It certainly is.
But just to add in a little bit about Fort Fisher, like in Wilmington, like what you said, like it is so, it seems so understudied in the Civil War. And I think it's because of what you have going on at the same time of it. Again, it's this like, not just the Eastern Theater, but it's also in the Western Theater with Sherman doing his March to the Sea. You know, what's happening in the Carolinas too. It just kind of gets overshadowed by that. But it is kind of the final nail in the coffin of the Confederacy, because without Wilmington, you're not going to get supplies to Robert E. Lee. And that's a huge thing. And I mean, the supplies have already been cut a little bit. I shouldn't say a little bit, a lot, because of Sherman's March to the Sea, but they're cut even more by this loss of Wilmington, right? So everything is playing into it. But like you said, I think without Wilmington, you know, you'd have this war going into the summer. So I think that's a really good point. But yeah, definitely Wilmington is understudied, and I really enjoyed these 3 episodes that we got to do about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So very good time had by both of us, and especially me, because I get to do this with you. So any final words from you, Finchero?
Well, same. I get to do this with you, and that's pretty awesome. So yeah, we will be back with y'all on Sunday evening with a Facebook Live. And
it was Sunday evening again, back to back, nocturnal. Yep. Okay.
Yep.
Forward to
a little
that.
evening action.
Absolutely, having fun with that. So anyway, all right. So off we go. Heading off once again to the Great White North and beyond. So off we go. Thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you join us on our live. Have a great end of the week. Stay warm where you are. Hope you're avoiding all the snow as we head off and finally leave North Carolina.
Yeah. See y'all later.
Adios, everybody.
Yep.